Rage 2 is a first-person shooter video game that is co-developed by Avalanche Studios and ID Software, and was published by Bethesda Softworks. The game was released back in 2019 and received mixed reviews at the time. Recently, I picked up the game for the first time and was pleasantly surprised by the experience compared to what I had heard about Rage 2. And since we are approaching the second anniversary of the game, I thought now would be a good time to cover if this game is worth revisiting for people who might have skipped it the first time around. As always, all the sources will be linked in the description below, so make sure to check those out and support those original articles. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at FONCT2, and with that out of the way, let's get into the legacy of Rage 2. Let's start by discussing the release of the game that was plagued with not only bad reviews from critics, but bad word of mouth from the general gaming audience. On Metacritic, the game was given a critic score of 67, which is actually better than the audience score, which was only a 5.9, based on a little under 600 ratings. And on OpenCritic, the game was given a fair rating with a 70 score based on top critic reviews, and only 40% recommendation from all critics. And the OpenCritic review sums up a lot of what many critics and fans alike felt about the game. Everyone was in agreement that in terms of the pure shooter elements, the game plays very well. The gameplay is smooth and the guns are fun, and all work together with the special attacks and melee options that are unlocked as you progress through the story. So everyone was in agreement that that aspect worked very well and the game was very crisp in that regard. But as for the game and story itself, it was criticized for being boring, the game is considered grindy, and the short campaign doesn't make up for it. Plus, the game boasted an open world, but the world is bland and a lot of reviewers complained it was too empty and lifeless. And these reviews significantly impacted how the casual audience viewed the game, and according to UK sales data, it directly impacted the financial success of the game. GameIndustry.biz reported that Rage 2 did top the sales chart in the United Kingdom, but the chart position was weaker than when Rage 1 originally launched, due to a decline potentially in industry purchasing physical copies of games, because once again, we have to go off UK sales data because they're still the only ones that publicly report it, and they can only report on physical copies. So digital copies have increased. The game industry actually accounts for this, and even accounting for this decline, Rage 2 still only sold half of what the original Rage sold, which had to have been sad for Bethesda because usually sequels are able to build off this audience and sales should normally increase, which is the whole point of making a sequel. And then this is where my personal experience with the game comes in. I did play the original Rage. It was actually a game I pre-ordered when that was still a popular thing to do at GameStop, and I was a big fan of the first game. It had some cool Easter eggs, and the game and story was a short and fun first-person shooter experience. And when Rage 2 was announced, I was definitely excited to see what the team was going to do this time. I saw the reveal and gameplay presentation at E3 2018, it looked good, but when the game was finally released, I decided against picking it up because reviews were so harsh on the title. So that's kind of what you need to know from my perspective going into me picking up this game for the first time. And that background leads right into my time trying out the game. Because there is still a pandemic and I had some time off school, I decided to try out a few games I had missed in the past few years. So I played Rage 2, Hellblade, and Agents of Mayhem. And before I started Rage, I was looking on how long to beat to get an idea of how long this game would take and how much time I would have to put into the title. And I was thinking I'd be towards the lower end of the game itself. They said sometimes the story could take 10 hours, and with extras on the game, maybe you could end up spending 20 hours total in this game and have everything completed. I definitely knew I wanted to finish the story, but I wasn't sure if I'd be spending time on all of the extras. Fast forward to after I played the game, 20 hours later, I actually had a ton of fun with the game. And this isn't me necessarily coming to the defense of the game or the criticisms that were talked about when the game was released, because there still are plenty of issues with the world and some repetitiveness with missions. So a lot of this hasn't really been fixed. The world still is missing some key elements. There are a lot of things to do, but part of the repetitiveness of this is there are only so many different side missions to do. So once you get a hang of what to expect, it's just those same things over and over with increased difficulty. But for me personally, I'm someone who prefers to play a game with a podcast or other video or show playing in the background, and this game was one of the best games to do this, which to me didn't make me bother the repetitiveness of some of these side missions or story elements, because I wasn't really 100% focused on this for the story. It was more just a fun first-person shooter to play through. The gunplay felt very good, and I didn't really have to focus too heavily on it. I could run into an area, clear the area, find the loot, leave, run to the next, summon a vehicle. So there really wasn't too much structure to my playstyle, just because I really didn't have to focus too heavily. But I know that's my preference. I know there is a decent amount of people who like to play games like this, and in my mind, Rage 2 fit that build perfectly, where I didn't have to focus all the time, every moment I was playing. And I would say this game was one of the best games to do this type of gameplay with. I don't mean any disrespect by this statement to Rage 2 either. I had so much fun picking up the game for an hour or two at a time. I would complete a few of the side objectives and then walk away until the next day, and did this for quite a few days until I had basically beat everything there was to do in the game. Also, I basically played this game in reverse. I finished almost the entire map, including the side objectives and finding new vehicles and unlocking them, before I really started the main campaign. Because if you haven't heard already, the way this game works is basically you have to do the first few missions until you unlock the open world, and then once you get there, you're allowed to do whatever you want. So you don't have to continue the main campaign. You can do side objectives and level up your character, find new gear, get new skills, all before you really have to jump into the main campaign story, which isn't that long all said and done. Which to me was a lot of fun, because by the time I had started the main campaign, I had most of the upgrades, skills, and weapons, which in my mind drastically improved the gameplay experience. One mechanic that is used in the game is a special type of mission area that includes an arc, which once the mission or area is completed, the arc can be opened and new gear and skills can be unlocked. So this is how you actually get all the weapons unlocked in game. You only start with a few, and then as you progress and find more of these arcs, you unlock additional weapons that definitely make the arsenal a lot more fun. And you also have to do this to unlock new skills, all of which kind of bring the gameplay experience together, which is still one criticism I have. The pacing is weird in that regard, where you could go almost the entire game without having a certain piece of gear because you missed a certain area. So that still feels slightly strange to me, but it was fun once you did have everything, all the weapons and all the skills to cycle through. And honestly, I had so much fun exploring the world and finding the arcs naturally just by exploring and doing all the areas. I didn't even know there was a mechanic where you can use your focus ability to look up in the sky and find glowing lights which lead players to the arcs. I actually never did this. I didn't even know till I was watching some videos on the game after the fact when I was thinking about making a video. So people can do this if you just want to avoid plain side missions and jump right into areas that will give you an arc. But in my mind, I had no problem doing this. I liked clearing out the missions, and I didn't even know this was a mechanic. They probably tell you, but I skipped it. In terms of the story, I really couldn't tell you anything about the story or characters, but the gameplay in my mind more than makes up for it again. The gunplay and skills work in such good tandem that trying out new weapons and skills in areas adds a lot of variety to the game, even if the objectives and enemies don't vary too much. But all of that said, I know another criticism is that the world was bland, which I would agree with. The world, while full of activities, definitely is missing some of the surprises and new things to make it feel like it actually is a living world. It just feels like a bunch of areas scattered throughout a large map that basically don't really vary too much in terms of what you're able to do. And there are a few different biomes, but for the most part you're in them so little that a lot of the game just feels super samey once you get into it and understand some of these gimmicks. But the team still put a lot of work into designing these areas and trying to make them as different as possible with different maps, different ways to platform, all of which once again leads back to really good gunplay. And this leads me all into my final point: is the game worth it? Now, I still don't think the game is worth $60, even as someone who played around 15 or 20 hours of the title, but I would definitely recommend anyone who is even slightly interested in the title to pick up the game for $20 or below. I would say that is more than a fair price to pay for a game like this that is very polished. I didn't really experience any other frame drops and the game ran very smoothly for me, but experiences as always will vary. I played on the PS4 Pro and PC, and the game once again played super well, was super smooth, and in my mind, 2 years later, it more than makes up for some of the downfalls the game had at launch. I would say this game is criminally underrated and deserves way better from the single player first person shooter audience who want something to pick up to play as we're still in lockdown and want something to just mindlessly have while watching other videos. I'm someone who's always looking for single player shooters, and this one was definitely worth picking up. Either way, that's where I'm going to end this video. And that is really the legacy of Rage 2 and kind of my thoughts about the game 2 years later. As always, make sure to like and share, subscribe for weekly gaming news, and I will see you guys in the next one.